Hello, and this is 4 fantastic Fantagraphics reads. And if you don't like alliteration, then you're not gonna like this. So recently I've read 4 Fantagraphics books back to back, and I just wanted to talk about them because I enjoyed them so much, really, for different reasons for each of them. First and foremost, Search and Destroy. This is by Achuichu Kaneko. I hope I pronounced that kind of right. And it's based on Dororo, the Osamu Tezuka book that was one of my favourite reads from last year, actually. I really, really loved Osamu Tezuka's Dororo more than any other work that he's put out there, really. And I loved it because the premise was so strong. There was this kid that was sacrificed really against his own will by his father to demons, and he basically sacrificed every part of his child, his eyesight, his hearing, his heart, his organs, loads of bits. But somehow this child survived, and he kind of fought to claim all his disparate body parts back, and that was the main story, with Dororo in the book being a young child thief that assisted the main character. Now, this follows along the same lines, but it reinvents that story in a really interesting way. It kind of gives him more of a almost kind of cyberpunk feel to it, in a way. Instead of being set in this feudal Japanese kind of backdrop, it's set in this almost futuristic world, which is similar in some ways to Pluto and that take on Osamu Tezuka's work. And I mean that in terms of the future. This future in this book has a past, and in that past there was a civil war between basically mechanized creatures, or creatures as they called in here, or creech, and humans. And that civil war is really shadowing over all this story in many ways. And in general, we're in the aftermath now, aftermath of the Civil War, and these sprawling cities have been created and engulfing all the surrounding areas. And we come across our main character, who's a female main character in this one. Now, in this story, Hayako comes out of nowhere, really, and it starts off with her butchering someone for their body parts that she's trying to reclaim back. But it's not as kind of mystical and mythical as setting out against the demons. She's setting out to take down a mechanized person, really, who has taken her human body parts to basically have on them, the eyes, the tongue, hands, legs, all of these different things. 48 different creatures have taken 48 various body parts from her. The first half of the book really sees her kind of just on a killing spree to get, her eyes, her tongue, and other parts of her body back, while meeting Doro, who is the young thief character. And they kind of get thrown together, and they have all this kind of action-packed adventure in this cityscape, this kind of post-apocalyptic cityscape. And then it goes back then and starts to really lay the groundwork of the backstory, but not all the way back. It starts out with her being found by a professor and being put back together and being made whole again, and then being introduced to the idea that there are these things that took her body parts off her, and she's just full of rage, and all these emotions are just pushing her beyond belief to kind of just be relentless in terms of fighting. She's not the greatest fighter in the world, but just the pure rage and determination is just pushing her beyond all of her kind of natural fighting skills, really. She's just going beyond everything. And the artwork is just absolutely stunning. It's full of action, full of that Tezuka kind of cartoony, over expression, manga style artwork, which is just so good. But then the action is just phenomenal. And the brutality is wonderful in it as well. And the eeriness of these creatures, and the world building that starts in it. And I should say it's one of, I think, 3 volumes that's going to be printed by Fantagraphics. But this one very much is laying down the groundwork of her abilities, her rage, her trying to get her body parts back by showing her get different body parts back right there and then. But then equally having these other characters kind of discover and be fascinated by her and try to spend more time with her and see what it's all about, really. But then giving that start to a backstory, because there's certainly two stories going on. It's that story of how she came to be stripped of all these body parts, how that civil war impacted on this world, and her story, her origin story, is being told in tandem with her revenge story. And it's really very good, in fairness. I loved this. It's only a small book, you know, standard tankobon size more or less, beautifully produced, you know, French flaps. It is sewn binding as well, and Fantagraphics again showing people how a book should be produced. Even a little paperback should have love and care and attention given to it. I'm certainly on board for the long haul for this, and I'm amazed at how these new mangakas taking Tezuka's work can really, even in some ways, surpass the original. I'm going to wait to fully commit to that though before I finish the whole series, but it's certainly on track to really push beyond the boundaries of the original work, much like Pluto did with Astro Boy stories. But anyway, onward. I'll have a drop of tea, actually. Time Under Tension by M.S. Harkness. Another paperback. Slightly weird sizing to this one. It is a standard paperback, no French flaps on this one, but again, sewn binding, really well put together book. And it's kind of wider than most books of this size, you know, so it's not your typical size. It's got some unique dimensions, really. But either way, this is by M.S. Harkness. And when I first picked this up, I purposefully kind of was attracted by the very overly expressionistic kind of artwork going on, the big hair, the very simplistic eyes and emotion showing on the face. The art style really kind of intrigued me, and so I purposefully didn't look into it a great deal. I knew it was autobiographical in certain ways, so I just jumped in and picked it up. And then I remember opening it for a video, I think, and I turned straight to her giving oral sex to a guy and him kind of ejaculating all over her face, and I was like, what have I picked up here? It is an amazing story of M.S. Harkness, who is this personal trainer, come artist and author, who has had a horrendous kind of upbringing in many ways. You know, she talks very briefly about her father molesting her. She talks about her family's past, and for a person who's had such deep family issues, she is incredibly familiar with her family history and clearly has a kind of interest and respect for her family history because she knows it so well and it is documented so well in her. At least that's how it came across, really. You know, she knows far more about her own family history than I know about mine, and I'm a bloody historian. But either way, the opening of the book takes a while. It's a very long, protracted introduction. Not a bad thing in any stretch of imagination, though. The introduction lasts probably about 30 or 40 pages before the title page comes up, and then it goes through different seasons of M.S. Harkness' life. And in that introduction, she lays down all this stuff about her childhood, about her growing up, about how she's graduating from art college and trying to study to be a personal trainer, as well as trying to get a comic book off the ground for the first time. And so it's detailing her trying to etch this career in things she loves. But equally then, she's, to get extra money, she's kind of, you know, prostituting herself in different ways. She's going out and performing oral sex and being tied up and having, you know, whips and stuff and random things for $300 a time and things like that. And she shows no shame or no kind of, you know, overly, you know, I'm being put on, I'm being, you know, taken advantage of and stuff like that. She seemed very in control of that and very unashamed, which was quite refreshing in a way. It didn't feel like she was afraid of her sexuality and afraid to use it to help her thing. But again, that's part of the whole personality of her, is her unveiling all these different parts of her life, but not really moralizing any of it, not really saying, oh, this is that. It's just laying out. In fact, there's a really good quote in here, which hopefully I can find now, which she puts on paper really well. Yeah, it's this. I never wanted to be someone just working for attention or praise. I'm just trying to put it all in order. Sometimes it's funny and sometimes it's serious, but it's always me. No judgment, no bids for sympathy, just whatever makes sense. And that's very much this kind of book. She's trying to put her life in order and trying to find some sense and meaning, but again, not going too deep. She's just trying to see what comes out, really. And we as readers read it and try and see what we get from it. And she, as an author and an artist, will create it and see what she can guess from it. And what I got from it is a young woman coming into the world, having many kind of issues with her upbringing, with her psychology, with everything, really, and just trying to work her way through it. And it was admirable how tenacious she was as well, and how she was just kind of pushing forward and trying to find this new ground. No matter what happened, knew that she had to keep going. And it's a really interesting story about, a woman growing up with that backstory in the world of art and personal training. There's a love story going throughout it as well. It's quite a real, honest overview of someone's life. Like Search and Destroy, it's a really quick read. You're not going to spend days and days on it. It'll be over in a couple of hours, maybe, really. And I found it very interesting and very good. And I'm certainly going to look into other things that MS Harkness has done. I think she got another book before this as well. More tea. Delights. A story of Hieronymus Bosch by Guy Caldwell. I had never heard of the artist before. But I love art and I love artistry. I've worked in art galleries and I've worked with art collections, and I'm always fascinated with art in different ways. That's part of the reason why I was attracted to comic books as a medium, because it fulfilled these two things of loving stories and storytelling and loving art, shoving them both together and getting this wonderful world of comics. This struck me as being really weird, and so that's why I picked it up. Mainly because it isn't a historical, factual book about Hieronymus Bosch. It's more of a possible story of Hieronymus Bosch. And what I mean by that is the author, Guy Caldwell, was absolutely fascinated and besotted by his painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights. Now, if you've never heard or seen any work by Hieronymus Bosch, then, go and have a look at some. It is very unique and very kind of... it just gets you talking about all the different things going on. He's a fascinating artist. And again, he is an artist that kind of grew up in that period where he was born, in 1450, and he was in a period where you wouldn't have associated the style of artwork he was coming out with that period at all. It seems so modern in so many ways, but again, so backward in many ways as well. He's a really unique artist in many ways. But we know so little about him as an artist and the creation of the painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights. So what this author has done is he's created a narrative looking at real historical people and events and what can be scantily put together, and then he's kind of fleshed it out. He loved this artwork so much and loved this painting that he got sucked down a rabbit hole of imagining how Hieronymus Bosch would have painted this, how unique it would have been at the time, the controversies it would have created at the time, the people around him, how they would have felt, the models that he was getting to pose in all the different extraordinary ways in the painting, how that relationship interacted. None of this is known historically, so he's created this narrative of his imagination, what it might have been like, what it may have been like. This is the story of the creation of the Garden of Earthly Delights as he imagines it may well be. There's some historical fact, but there's a lot of historical fiction as well. And the style is wonderful, I think. I really like the style of artistry going on. It's right up my street, these heavy black lines and black and white art throughout, and really clear and concise, and it doesn't go over the top by being really creative in terms of panel layout or ambitiousness in terms of, what's he doing with this panel and all that. It is quite straightforward in that. But what's not straightforward is him making interesting the creation of this painting, because again, we know so little. It's like someone telling a story around a campfire about how this painting come to be. It's like a folk tale about how this amazing painting came to pass. And to have a book that's, about 160 or so pages, or 100 and how many pages? 160 pages or so. To have that as an interesting narrative from start to finish, really, just the creation of a painting, which we know so little about, is really impressive, I think. And it really showed a lot of ingenuity in how he was telling the story and the character he would give to Hieronymus Bosch in terms of the internal torture that he would have given on himself, because he was such a deeply religious time and he was such a deeply religious person. He's creating these, you know, almost erotic images in the Garden of Earthly Delights and things like that. How he does that but gets away with it, you know, how the church sees him and that whole narrative. And again, most of it is made up, but he would have had that dilemma at the time, you know. He was such a staunchly religious person, you know, he would have to justify his artistry. His artistry was there for God first and foremost and for religion. But now suddenly he's been asked by lords and people to kind of create this almost kind of, you know, nudist paradise in some way to titillate the upper classes in the courts, but he had to reframe it to make it more of a religious and more of a narrative to it, so he could actually create something that spoke to him and many other people. And so yeah, I loved this. It was a super quick read, and it's mostly based in Hieronymus Bosch's studio, so it's mostly dialogue based with conversations with him and other people coming in and talking about the development and getting nude people in to pose for him in different ways. Lovely hardback as well, you know, really kind of striking design on this hardback. No dust jacket, but really kind of embossed and debossed cover going on, all the type of embossing you can imagine. And then wonderfully at the back they've got the full kind of opening painting of the Garden of Earthly Delights, which is a wonderful touch. I love that, and I think that being there is a great touch. Sewn binding, really good book, and again a really quick and fun book, I think. And if you like art and if you like artistry and you enjoy people being passionate about the things they love and that passion spreading to you, then this is the type of book, because Guy Caldwell's passion definitely spread to me, because he clearly is just besotted by this painting and he just wants to kind of know the truth, so he's crafted the truth for himself, or a truth, which is great. And finally, Paco Rocco, Return to Eden. Now I read this a while back and I have to say it was one of the most kind of touching books that I've read by Paco Rocco in a long time. It was one of these books that I read and it stayed with me kind of thinking about it. Paco Rocco has an amazing ability to kind of tell really basic, straightforward family narratives, but then the feeling and emotion in them is so strong that they stay with you. So the narrative follows Paco Rocco tracing his mother's stories from her youth, really. He finds a photo, and the photo is of his mother and various kind of siblings at the beach, and this photo is one of those things that sticks with Paco Rocco, and he kind of tries to investigate it. And so it tells us the story of Antonia, her siblings, her parents, how they were growing up in the area, and he uses actual photos from the family's life and splices them into the book in various points, and it just tells that very personal, real story of, you know, family and how they grow up, how they grow apart, the dramas that happen, the secrets they keep, and then the family come in later on in life and trying to discover what was being hidden and trying to discover the kind of meaning behind these stories and the emotion behind them. And essentially the photo is that driving point. He's trying to find out why this photo was so cherished, but then he looks at the family's whole history to try and grab that story, to try and really refine, okay, if this is the whole story, what makes that thing that special? And so yeah, it even goes into, you know, the family having a churro stand, you know, the black market in Spain, and, you know, the Spanish Civil War and all this type of thing. The different artistry going on as well. The punishing poverty that the family would have gone through, where the kids are sitting there eating and then they realise, oh, the mother's not eating. Why is the mother not eating? Oh, she's not hungry. It's not that she's not hungry, there's no food. And then it jumps forward, show Antonia, you know, in the 60s, and she's kind of putting on a bit of weight because she's been through that. She's like, I'm never going through it again. When I see bread, I'm going to eat it. When I see this, I'm going to eat this. She's enjoying those finer things in life, as she should. But again, all the while, we trace in this family story, so how a family lives, how, you know, through bombings, through all of these different tragedies going through the Spanish Civil War. It's an amazing story of life in that period in Spain, and the kind of the hopes and the dreams of people going through it, but also the real hardships of their lives, but then equally where they ended up and how they interacted with their children, how it changed them as people. It's a really personal, realistic tale of someone's life. In many ways, it reminded me a little bit of Ethel and Ernest by Raymond Briggs, and that was him looking back at his parents' early years and their relationship and trying to understand and document their story to make sense of it for himself, but also to kind of document it for posterity and for history. And this is similar to that. It really goes through those daily struggles, their life, their dreams, everything. And it is a wonderful book. I very much enjoyed this. Really quick and easy read. It's similar to The House in terms of the dimensions of it, and again sewn binding, but it's got that kind of widescreen length, if you want to put it like that. But it's a wonderfully put together book and so personal, goes into so many kind of little things, always shows off Paco Roco's interest in history as well, so it does now and again go beyond the scope of the time frame and go a bit further back, and goes into, you know, religious imagery and things like that. It's a wonderful book. I really enjoyed this a lot. So those were 4 fantastic Fantagraphics reads, and I very much love Fantagraphics as a publisher, and I hope to be picking up more and more of these and their books as I go along. But hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you on the next one.